Hi, this is Music 66E, Ableton Live, my final project. Beginning with the overview and the session view. For this project, I wanted to make a short 3-minute song using minimal sounds and effects. And I began with the session view and I set up the song's parameters as follow. The tempo at 85 BPMs, the time signature at 4/4, and also try to keep everything consistent. All the instruments that I use a relative the same key. For the style, I would call it like a dub, groove, down tempo beat. The intended audience is a young demographics who like electronic music. Here's a few of the clips that I made, and here's some scenes. The way I organize the song structure is by being consistent with all the MIDI and audio tracks. And I label all the markers, I name and color the tracks, I use an outline for the song structure, beginning with the intro, 3 different sections, the breaks, the coda, and the way I generated my ideas and the sounds was by playing around with the instruments, trying to create a groovy beat with a strong rhythm and some melodic sounds. For each track roll, the drums I use as a foundation for the rhythm. I added the harmonies, I would call it diminish. Next, the melody, modal. And the way I organized this project, the structure of the project was using MIDI and audio tracks in the clips. I color and label the tracks, the devices, the clips, and I make sure everything was well organized. And for the sound effects, the A section, I use a reverb, and for the B section, I use a delay compressor. And I routed all the drums and the percussion into a compressor, the bass as well. Group sense, some I use an EQ, reverb, and gain. The returns, I use some individual instruments. Next, I'm going to talk about the session view and some of the examples that I use for some samples, like the warping. Make sure there was some markers placed, and I played around with that, and also changed the modes. I played around with the beat, texture, tones, complexity, complex, pro as well. I opened the sample box and adjusted the audio clips for the warping and the sample transposition. Next, I clipped some envelopes. I selected both ends. I applied the fade in, fade out. And I did that to several tracks. Next, I converted an audio track to a MIDI function by just right-clicking an audio clip, and I made a few MIDI notes and just play around with the settings there. Next, for the instruments, I created a custom rack, beginning with a drum rack, and I used a patch and an 808 kit. I opened up, I used the pencil tool to write a few notes down in the MIDI view, change some notes, I sampled some sounds, drum sections. I started with the kick, the snares, hi-hats, etc. For the 3 minimal live instruments, I use a simpler, and I open up the MIDI view. Here's an impulse, the sampler, and for the third-party instrument, I use Max, a drum machine from Max, MSP, and I also play around by writing down some notes. Next, recording into the arrangement view, I began by selecting the drum clips. Next, I use some percussion, some bass, some synth. I used the tab key to go back and forth in both views, so I could lay out the clips into the sequencer. After that, I placed 2 markers, one in the beginning at bar 1, label that as start, the next one at the end for the end. Additional editing to improve the piece. I used panning for some tracks, let some alone. Some effects that I used were reverb, delays, gains. I lowered the volume, I balanced some faders, I equalized some tracks. I changed the velocity in the dynamics. Finally, I use some minimal effects. Okay, next I'm gonna, for the final stages, I use a limiter and a compressor for the master track and lower the fader. Um, this course has been great. I learned a great deal about the interface and how to use both session and arrangement views. I learned a lot of new concepts, new terminology, how to handle the audio preference settings. I know how to organize, manage my audio. Also edit samples, MIDI files, all the new the features, the warping, time stretch. I feel more comfortable using this instruments and effects to produce, record, remix all my music, and I hopefully I'll be able to use my new skills to improve my music creations. Thank you.